Welcome back. I thought we'd take another of our regular perusals of the international motorcycling news because a lot of varied, interesting and potentially significant stuff has been happening recently. Let's begin with a bit of good news on the subject of the banning of sales of new bikes with combustion engines that looked destined to be introduced by 2035 in Europe and other parts of the world. It seems, as I reported a couple of weeks ago, that there may be some kind of reprieve in the offing. As I mentioned previously, a handful of European countries, headed by Germany, have got together to fight back against the EU directive that everything basically go electric or hydrogen in 2035. And they've said, hold on a minute, this is not actually a realistic or practical timetable for many car manufacturers, and never mind the bike manufacturers who face a much tougher job transitioning to electric power, given the space and weight constraints of two-wheel vehicles. They have rightly highlighted as well the lack of infrastructure. There aren't enough charging points even now, and it doesn't look like there will be enough at the current rate of construction to come anywhere near the levels required to cope with the demand if the continent suddenly switches every new car and bike to battery power. Synthetic fuels could provide an answer. Yes, it's still early days, but Porsche, in conjunction with Esso, I think it is, are already busy producing carbon neutral synthetic fuels and proving their viability. Carbon neutral? Indeed, if the factory that produces them is run on renewable energy. At the moment it's very expensive and there's nowhere near enough capacity for it to be a realistic option yet. Especially if you have to build your fuel factory next to a wind farm or a hydroelectric dam. But money talks, profit can ultimately make just about anything happen, and so if the current major suppliers of fossil fuel, the Middle Eastern kingdoms, want to get in on the act as their natural raw material of oil runs out or is legislated out of existence, they have another raw material that would enable them and encourage them to produce synthetic fuels. Sunshine. Solar power is clean and green, and if you use it to make synthetic fuel, you have a carbon neutral fuel. The other huge advantage of this option is that you can put the stuff in all existing internal combustion engines without any modifications to those engines. And the delivery system, petrol stations, is already there and ready to go. So if you're a petrol head, there is hope for you yet. Okay, from that bit of engine-saving future innovation to some life-saving innovation that is available right now. I'm talking about riding kit, and two items arrived in my inbox that I thought were worth sharing. The first concerns a helmet from the French manufacturer Shark. They've just released a new model, the Squall i3, that makes it the first production helmet to feature integrated brake lights. Using a similar sensor to that found in most smartphones, I suppose, the helmet can detect when you're braking and will then illuminate the brake lights, not with a constant light, but rather flashing 3 times per second during normal braking or 5 times per second if it's hard braking. Anything that can help a dozy car driver realise you're stopping and you'd rather not be run over has got to be a good thing. Rider visibility is also improved from the front with front-mounted LED lights that can either flash or remain on constantly. Price for this lid, that also features Shark's latest snug fit technology and visor changing system, and staying with rider safety, here's a fetching jacket that you could wear to a high-powered business meeting and then also happily wear on your ride home. This is the latest version of a product that has been out for a little while now, but it's worth sharing for those of you who might have missed it previously and have about €800 or around 16,000 rand burning a hole in your business expense account. It is obviously a smart blazer jacket, but it is constructed with materials like DuPont Kevlar that mean it won't tear apart if you happen to take a tumble. There's also armour for the elbows, shoulders and back, which makes it the perfect garment for the distinguished gentleman's ride, details of which are coming up shortly. If a blazer capable of protecting you in the event of a crash is something you thought you'd never see, then what about this? Yes, it is a new Harley-Davidson model. At first glance, it's nothing particularly unusual, a shape that harks back to a model, the XR1200, that was, for me at least, one of Harley's most entertaining bikes of the past 20 years or so. But this is a 350. Yes, a piddly little 353cc parallel twin powers this new entry-level model from the manufacturer that is itself the epitome of big, heavy and very expensive American iron. I never thought I'd see the day, and I kind of wish I'd never seen this. I understand the cold, hard, bottom-line business logic behind the decision, attracting new customers in less affluent parts of the world with a relatively affordable 90,000 rand bike, and also providing an entry-level model for the wealthy regions where strict licensing laws limit the size of bike that you can ride for the first couple of years of your biking career. But still, I'm convinced the negative effects on a premium brand like Harley-Davidson are being underestimated, because this bike that is essentially a dressed up, modified model from Chinese giants QJ Motor is the kind of thing that its traditional customer base is going to find hard to ignore. In fact, I'm sure it will positively antagonise the average American Harley customer, who might well see it as some kind of betrayal, and will certainly consider it a cheapening, a tarnishing of their own bike that relies, after all, on so much of its appeal being of an image of expense and prestige. The X350 won't immediately be available worldwide, but it will appear in the US, where its already modest 36 horsepower will be chopped nearly in half for its intended use in Harley-Davidson's riding schools. This ties in quite nicely with some interesting comments I read in an interview with Stefan Pira, the man behind the miraculous recovery and growth of KTM over the past couple of decades, and also the more recent rebirth of the Husqvarna and GasGas brands. As I've mentioned before in the news, he has acquired a 25% stake in MV Agusta, a share that I said I thought would probably inevitably and quite imminently turn into a controlling interest. Pira himself is no stranger to partnerships with big manufacturers of smaller bikes, sharing technology in exchange for, I presume, easier access to huge potential new markets and economies of manufacturing scale for his existing brands. He has had a long relationship with Indian giant Bajaj and is also collaborating closely with Chinese concern CF Moto. The interview I read came from one of motorcycling media's, actually two of motorcycling media's own giants. You can read Alan Cathcart's To and Fro with Pira, and although it covers many interesting topics, it was Pira's comments about MV Agusta's plans that really caught my attention. I interviewed MV Agusta boss Timur Sardarov about a year ago, but I never published the story, mainly because I thought it would have been unfair on Sardarov. It was early March, his home country Russia had just invaded Ukraine, to his obvious distress, and behind the scenes I think things were already pretty tense regarding cash flow and solving problems he'd inherited from the previous owners of the Italian marque. The result was an interview in which, frankly speaking, Sardarov came across as a man preoccupied, tense, morose even, and although I very much appreciated him giving me so much of his time during such an unprecedented period of stress, I ultimately decided it would be unfair of me to share the interview, since it would give an unduly harsh and negative impression of the man and his business. Anyway, what I'm leading up to is the fact that we discussed what was the big news for MV at the time, the impending adventure models to be sold under the Lucky Explorer banner. Even after questioning him about the Lucky Explorer name, I still wasn't quite sure if it was therefore still a MV Agusta or completely separate. Sort of like maybe the Dragstar Yamahas. That's what I ended up surmising anyway. Getting into this segment, I imagine, must have delighted the salesmen and bean counters in the company who would have loved to play in this lucrative class of big bikes, but it's a huge ask to come from nothing to have a competitive product. Doable though. For proof of that, just cast a sideways glance at Harley in its Pan America. But I also asked about the decision to go for a slightly re-engineered and rebadged Chinese model for the middleweight 550 adventure bike. Surely that could have some consequences for the brand's premium image and reputation. He was quite eloquent, if a bit long-winded, which is rich, coming from me, in its defence, but not very convincing, I thought. MV was obviously jealous of Benelli, these days Italian in name only and essentially a fancy label for QJ Motor in Europe. The same Chinese partner, by the way, that MV is dealing with. Because Benelli, anyway, had the TRK 502 that was Italy's best-selling bike over 500cc for a couple of years running. Who wouldn't want a slice of that very profitable pie? But with a barely disguised Chinese model that is already 90% known and available through Benelli, I don't care how much MV say they've had an influence on its design and improvement, it's still a Chinese bike, made in China. MV badge or not, it ain't gonna be no MV Agusta. Anyway, in Cathcart's interview, Pira seems to have come to much the same conclusion and reckons that MV should concentrate on its upmarket, ultra desirable sporting road bike heritage. He may not be in control yet, but I would imagine that his views still carry some considerable weight around the boardroom within the Italian company, so I will be very surprised if the Lucky Explorer 9.5 and most definitely the 5.5 ever see the light of day. Before we get to our final bit of good news, I think I'll just throw in an element I find hugely frustrating. It's about noise. Loud exhaust pipes that are antisocial and make a huge part of the non-biking public haters. That may not concern you because you are a biker, a rebel, a risk taker who cares nothing about anyone else, and you think it's all too much fuss about nothing. As someone who lives in an area where there are many, many fantastic biking roads and who loves hiking in these areas as well as riding my bike through them, and who often sits in the garden of a summer afternoon enjoying the view, I can confirm that a loud bike is a truly obnoxious, selfish thing. I've recently started a series on our YouTube channel where I'm filming some amazing roads that I happen across on my travels here in Europe. It's a privilege to be able to ride in these places and to film them and bring them to you and possibly even inspire you to travel and ride some of them someday. Unfortunately, these opportunities are becoming more rare because inconsiderate morons, bikers who can barely muster a brain cell to keep their other one company, are gradually ruining this privilege for themselves and for the rest of us. It takes a special kind of stupid and despicable selfishness to do this. I was planning on exploring the Spanish side of the Pyrenees this summer, having heard great things about the amazing mountain passes you can find there. Well, as of last week, one of the major national parks there, the vast majority of these mountainous regions in Europe tend to be national parks, has now banned all motorcycles. And you know what? Although it's undoubtedly unfair not to include cars in the ban, and although I hope the law is refined to just ban or heavily fine illegally loud pipes, I can't help but sympathise with those local communities who had just had enough of their idyllic mountain life being absolutely destroyed by a small number of retarded bikers and their retardedly loud exhausts. These days, a loud pipe often releases very little extra power, so there's no real performance advantage. And for the rider himself, usually the best sound comes from the roaring airbox sucking in all that air. Because you're so close to it, you can enjoy that sound without ruining everyone else's appreciation of the mountains. We have enough apps and in-helmet audio systems these days. I reckon there's big money and a lot of gratitude from more intelligent bikers if we could get an app that Bluetooths a selection of exhaust sounds to your lid, but tied directly to your throttle use. In other words, it provides an authentic sound based on your riding, but obviously only you can hear it. Anyway, sorry. Rant over. Please try and be considerate and a little bit clever if you don't want all our favourite playgrounds taken away from us. Brilliant bikes with nowhere brilliant to ride them are pretty much useless lumps of expensive metal and plastic. And if you agree, please spread the message, even if a few of these morons, who are often as loud off their bikes as they are on them, try and belittle you for your too sensible and boring opinion. Right then, a final bit of good news to finish off with. An excuse to dress up and ride your bike in the name of a good cause. The Distinguished Gentleman's Ride is coming up on Sunday, the 21st of May. It takes place all over the world, and if you want to take part in South Africa, or anywhere for that matter, head over to gentlemansride.com to find out where you can participate and how to enter. And that, my fellow bikers, is where we're going to leave it for this episode. See you again next week. Cheers for now.